we only have a limited time. We could talk about what Freedom Summer was for the rest of the week and probably still not cover. Freedom Summer really was not the culmination, but the access point of many civil rights and social injustices that happened in this country. The civil rights movement was not heating up, but getting national attention and traction. And there were murders, there were civil rights violations, there was a gross mistreatment of people of color in the South and sometimes in the North, but more explicitly in the South. And people across the country came to a consensus that something must be done. So the nexus of that movement was in the South. There were students across this country who decided that they need to go to the South to advocate for civil rights, social justice, and voting access. There were groups of lawyers who said they needed to go to the South to file legal briefs and file court cases against the intransigent legal system that kept segregation in place. There was, I'm happy to report, significant members of the Jewish community who felt that it was part of their faith, Dr. Vaughn, to be activated in the South. I'm happy to report that a dear friend of mine who since passed from this area, Jim Cooper, who was a lawyer, helped lead that activity. He went to the South along with groups of other lawyers who took civil rights cases, who defended civil rights activists, and who defended the Naacp and other groups in the South who were under great peril, not only legal peril, physical peril, because many people, and we still have not given a good account of the many people who were lynched. In fact, there's a lynching museum that a lawyer named Brian Stevenson has put together that commemorates some of the people who were lynched. So that's what caused Freedom Summer. Century of oppression and suppression and mistreatment, violence against people of color, intransigent movements against civil rights, all that culminated to people saying we have to do something, and that something was Freedom Summer.
I just want to start, thank you, Councilman Shabazz, and I just wanted to start by certainly acknowledging my privilege as a white woman, and I am certainly humbled and honored to be on the panel today as an Atlantic City historian. I look forward to hearing the experiences of our fellow panelists, certainly, and hearing more from them on their lived experiences. Atlantic City in 1964 was an interesting place. Atlantic City was built as a tourism resort. It started as a tourism resort. It's always been a tourism resort. And in 1964, it was kind of on, well, a tourism resort with its ebbs and flows, with its ups and downs. And in 1964, Atlantic City was certainly on a down. The city had not come out of World War II very well. Many of the hotels had been sold and bought by outsiders, and they allowed the city to kind of get run down, basically. The hotels weren't being kept updated, and so a lot of the tourism in the area had left. And so with that background, the Democratic National Convention came into town, which I think we'll be talking about in a little bit more, and the city really suffered. It was supposed to be a grand event for Atlantic City to really show off and to renew its tourism status, and it really did not work out well for the city. Freedom Summer, though, I think is something that did work out for the city. It really lit a spark around the country, as well as here in Atlantic City, and led to voting rights laws and actions and wonderful things that brought about change, as we see a time for change in this exhibit. And I think that 1964 was certainly an important era and started something big here in Atlantic City with the Democratic National Convention and Fannie Lou Hamer and others. And so we look forward to talking about that more.
Freedom Summer was very significant here in Atlantic City. And what was really stood out for that occasion was that there were so many people on the boardwalk. I read something, a quote from Stokely Carmichael, who said that at times there were 2,000 and 3,000 people on the boardwalk, and they did a vigil because right before the Democratic National Convention came to town, the bodies of 3 civil rights workers were discovered. They had been missing. They were doing their civil rights duties in Mississippi, and they were accosted by the police, put in jail, and taken for a ride and never seen again. So one of the things that was on the boardwalk was their car. The shell remains, the remains of their car was displayed on the boardwalk, and it was kind of a memorial event. And this I know not because I was there, but because I read. But you know, it made it such a poignant thing that we're still discussing this now, and we need to continue this conversation. So, and I also want to say I'm honored to be sitting here instead of Mr. Ralph Hunter, who was unable to be with us today, and he sends his regrets and me.
So, Freedom Summer, I would like to just kind of briefly talk about it from the perspective of a professor of communication and also a professor of Africana Studies, that one of the things that was so significant about this event was Fannie Lou Hamer and her presentation at the Democratic National Convention, and just that importance of voice and the use of the media in that situation. So one of the things that I often talk about with my students is the way that the civil rights movement and television kind of grew up together. And so you have this new thing that's in people's living room, and they're seeing other places in the world and what's going on around the world. And you also have, you know, a very savvy group of individuals, because those who were involved in the civil rights movement understood that the use of the media, and understood how to navigate that, and understood that this is important because people are all over the world are able to see what's happening here. And so the way that Fannie Lou Hamer was able to use her voice, it was so significant even that President Johnson decided, I need to have a press conference at the same time in order to try to quiet that voice, knowing that so many people are seeing this in their living room, and they're hearing what is happening, what's happening in Mississippi, what's happening, you know, all over the South, and how ridiculous these rules were that were trying to suppress the Black vote. And so that's something that I, you know, hope we get a chance to kind of dabble in a little bit more today.
Awesome. Thank you all for answering that first question. And like we said, there's going to be so much more that we can dive deeper into. So please, we have a few questions here, but if anybody feels compelled to ask a question, please raise your hand and we'll get to you as well. All right. So you all mentioned something that I think is really impactful to talk about, was just the importance of allies in this movement. You know, Councilman, you mentioned some lawyers from this area who've been down to the South to help with cases down there, and also some freedom riders and things like that. How important were allies to the success of the movement, not only from Freedom Summer standpoint, but just in general for the civil rights movement?
Well, the civil rights movement couldn't have been successful without allies, people who believed and were moved by conscience to do a number of things. There were different levels of allies. There were allies, obviously, who gave money. There were allies who gave physical support. There were allies who gave their life. There were allies in different movements who helped organizationally. There were allies who helped strategically. There were allies who helped politically to move forward with the movement. And let me just say 3 real quick points before I lose my train of thought. Since I'm the oldest one on the panel, I can take that privilege, I hope. Atlantic City had some direct relations to the freedom movement and the summer movement. Union Baptist Temple, which is in Atlantic City, was where the delegates met for strategy. Union Baptist Temple was also the place that Dr. King actually spoke at. And Union Baptist Temple, the pastor who since passed away, was Reverend Matthew Neal.
Wow.
Reverend Neal was a civil rights activist, a social justice activist, in addition to being the pastor of Union Temple. So we have some direct historical relations to the civil rights movement and to the summer of '64. Let me just get a quick commercial in too. We're coming back full circle, Brother Johnson, because this summer, in July 14th to 20th, the National NAACP Convention is going to be in Atlantic City. So I had to get that commercial in. So we're really coming back full circle for the significance of Atlantic City in civil rights and social justice. And like I said in my opening statement, unfortunately, voting rights, voting access, police brutality, the dignity of African American women in the treatment that they receive in public places and by government, we're still dealing with that, unfortunately. Right here in 2021, 68 years later after Dr. King's speech and after the civil rights movement, I would suggest, unfortunately, although we made a lot of progress, we made tremendous progress. We had 2 terms of President Obama, but we still, unfortunately, are fighting some of the same demons, some of the same systems, and some of the same mentality that we fought in the 60s. So that's our charge. This conversation, in my mind, in order to be productive, has to be something that spurs everyone to action at whatever level they're comfortable with and whatever their skill set takes them to. But it can't just be a conversation because, unfortunately, we have forces that are moving to try to turn the clock back. And I know I'm an elected official. Some people say, well, Shabazz, you're an elected official. I am, but I'm also the president of NAACP, which is an organization that is standing in the gap and saying that we can't go back and we have to move forward. And unfortunately, there are forces who are saying that we must go back and we can't move forward. So that's a real dilemma that we're not just having an intellectual conversation, although we have Sister Allison here, who is one of the leading intellectuals in the area. It is an intellectual conversation, but it's a reality-based conversation too, that we have to decide what we are going to do moving forward.
I just wanted to expound a little bit on what Councilman Shabazz had said earlier. James Cooper, you were talking about allies. James Cooper was a lawyer from Margate, I believe.
Margate.
And he went down, as you mentioned, to Mississippi to serve as part of the president's legal team where they were sending legal aid down to the folks in Mississippi that were being jailed for civil rights violations. You know, we have his papers at the Stockton Library, and I was looking through them, and Mr. Cooper was extremely impacted by the situation. He was serving as counsel for a number of different defendants, including some who were being tried for murder of a police officer. And he wrote home to his law partner and explained how different the situation was. That the press was portraying it, of course, as being a difficult situation, but it was much harder and it was much more difficult than he had ever imagined. And how he, was just so impacted by this experience that he was having in Mississippi, that he said he would never be the same again. This is right about the time, right around 1964 or so, in the 60s, that he was down there, and it was only for 2 or 3 weeks, but he said it changed his life, certainly.
All right. I think another interesting point about the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, they organized in Mississippi, and they chose as one of their leaders Fannie Lou Hamer, who was such a strong woman. But I want to say that she was such an example of the people who followed her, because she was a former sharecropper. She worked in the fields with the other people that were being represented and who were being misrepresented by not being allowed to vote. One of the things that she said was she didn't realize she had the power to vote, or that she was someone who could cast a vote, because they had never been allowed to. And she was in her late 30s or early 40s when she realized that she had this power. And I have to say, she used that power. She was an amazing, amazing woman. You know, and to get a leader like that out of something like this made the whole thing worth it too, that we have another hero.
That's a great segue to Dr. Allison, because not only do we have the annual Fannie Lou Hamer Symposium at Stockton, we also have an event room named after her on the AC campus. So Dr. Allison, can you talk a little bit about the impact of Fannie Lou Hamer on this movement?
Yes, one of the things that, and we're, by the way, 18th Fannie Lou Hamer Symposium is coming up on October 12th at Stockton University. And so more information will go out about that. Our speaker is virtual. Some elements will be in person, but it will be able to be viewed virtually. So yes, we're in our 18th year of honoring Mrs. Hamer for all that she did. And one of the things that I think is really important about her voice is the fact that she was, you know, just a woman who was living her life, you know, served as a sharecropper, and just was so impacted by what was happening that she felt like, I have to get out here and do something. You know, she wasn't educated. So many of the young people who were a part of SNCC were, you know, college students. And so she wasn't that. She wasn't as young as they were. She wasn't as educated or well-read as they were, but she was out there and she became a premier voice in all of this. And so I think in so many ways that inspired others to think, oh, okay, I don't have to be this, or I don't have to be that. I can be a part of this in any kind of way. I can use my voice in the way that she's been using her voice. And also, you know, as a woman out in front of all of this, that was another big part of it, because most of the leadership that were seen the most and talked about the most were men in the movement. And so that too was significant, particularly having her sit and speak before a national audience at the Democratic National Convention. That was all so significant. And it speaks to several things. It speaks to the fact that, you know, first of all, it's never too late to just get out there and really make a difference and use your voice. And you don't have to have a certain kind of pedigree either. And that's really, I think, what she represented and inspired so many people as a result of that.
Thank you for that. Again, I love that we have the next segue over to, again, the impact of Fannie Lou Hamer, and not only her impact on the movement as, you know, a representative of who some of these things were impacting, but she was definitely a singer.
Yes, she was.
And we have a singer right here with
Yes,
us.
she was.
Dr. Beverly Vaughn, professor of music.
She
at
was a
Stockton
singer.
University.
Yes, she was. Yeah, Dr. Walker.
Oh, we have a hand.
Do you have a hand? Yeah, thank you, Heather. Because I thought about that. One of the great things that Fannie Lou Hamer left for us, she was a singer. And you guys got to help me. Now, I don't know how you're going to do, but you're going to be able to sing really loud through your mask, okay? We're going to sing some freedom songs. How's that sound, y'all? So, panel, stand up. Come on, panel. Because we want you all to help me move around as we do this. One of the songs that she loved to sing, in fact, her favorite song was This Little Light of Mine. Couple hands together. I'm gonna let it shine. And y'all that song with me around. This little light of mine. I'm gonna let it shine. Y'all give them some encouragement. Come on, panel. This little light. What you gonna do? What you gonna do? I'm gonna let it shine. Yeah, let it shine. Now, you know I'm gonna get you. Come on, you know I'm gonna get this man right here. Everywhere I go. Here we go. Oh, you gonna sing now. I'm gonna let it shine. Good job, girl. Everywhere I go. What did he say? I'm gonna let it shine. Hallelujah. Everywhere. I'm telling you, I'm gonna cast my vote for freedom. Come on, Reed, let's go. I'm gonna cast my vote. Why? For freedom. Come on, y'all, here we go. I'm gonna cast my vote. You know I'm gonna get you. For freedom. And cast my vote. Cast my vote. Cast my vote. Now, we're not finished yet. Another song that they like to sing. Another song they like to sing. I should get you. Another song they like to sing was Gonna Let Nobody Turn Me Round. Turn me round. Turn me round. And gonna let nobody turn my road. Ask for freedom now. Here we go. Gonna let nobody turn me round. Turn me round. Now listen, panel, when we get to turn me round, y'all got to turn around. And gonna let nobody turn me round. There you go. Turn me round. Turn me round. And gonna let nobody turn me round. Pass my vote for freedom. That's how we go. Gonna let nobody turn me round. She was powerful, not only as a speaker, but as a singer, and the songs of the civil rights movement, the most famous, right? The most famous songs of the civil rights movement kept it together. Fannie Lou Hamer, all our leaders of 1964, used the music to keep us together. We'll come back with another couple songs. Y'all practice, you're gonna be fabulous the next time. Thank you so much. Oh, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Dr. Vaughn. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I hope that woke us up a little bit of short day with you up a little bit. So thank you again, Dr. Vaughn.
Thank you so much.
I have a comment. Darius.
Yes.
Okay. Hi, I'm Soletta. I'm the treasurer of the museum. But I wanted to make a connection. Fannie Lou Hamer the reason why she became a SNP worker was because she was evicted off of her plantation after the plantation that she worked on as a sharecropper, after she tried to register to vote. And that's kind of important. She really was not like a person who was going to work for SNP. She was forced into working for SNP because she was, what do you want to call that? She was taken away from her normal way that she would have earned her income.
Wow.
And that's kind of important.
Good point.
Big important.
Thank you for sharing this.
All right.
Circumstances, right?
Absolutely.
Right.
Darius, can I just add a quick point?
Please.
Fannie Lou Hamer was absolutely a phenomenal person, icon, suffered tremendously for the civil rights movement. But I think we should remember that there are many Fannie Lou Hamers who we don't even know.
Right.
All over the South, all over the North. And that's not to diminish anything that she did, but just to put it in context, there were women who not only helped in the civil rights movement and led to die that we don't even know, that they're not even recognized, not even mentioned in history. So I think we need to keep that in mind. There are many Fannie Lou Hamers. There are many leaders, people who made significant contributions that we don't even know about. We don't even speak about because we don't know about them. And I think that's important that we keep that in our minds. That this is a struggle that many people have been lifted up and have sacrificed for. I just wanted to mention one lady right here in Atlantic City, Ethel Lawton, who many people don't even remember, who was a civil rights worker and a leader in Atlantic City, local civil rights. Edgar Harris, who was the advisor to the Atlantic City Youth Council, which was one of the strongest youth councils in the whole region. Maceo Turner, who was one of the leading civil rights leader, and he was an attorney and the president of the NAACP. And so there are many people, and my point is, Fannie Lou Hamer was great, Fannie Lou Hamer was super, but there were many other people who distinguished themselves and unfortunately gave their lives for the movement that we're still in. So I just want to say that.
And just in what ways can we ensure that youth and students who are in their young years can really ensure that they understand the impact of some of these movements that happened in the past, and how they're so similar to some things that are happening now, and how we can ensure that they are part of the movement too, to continue the fight. Yes.
Okay, I'd like to weigh in on this.
Sure.
I really think that organizations like the African American Heritage Museum that focus on educating our populace, really. It's not just the children or the adults.
Mm-hmm.
We're there for everybody. And I think that supporting our organizations that affirm us is so important. You know, so many people lost their lives getting the right to vote, marching, protesting, just living. You know, it wasn't easy way back when to be black in America. It's not so easy now, but we see a progression where things are getting better. And I think that education is what has been so important and such a keystone for us as a population. We always honor our teachers, you know, and put them on a pedestal, because we have always realized since the abolition of slavery how important it is to know things, you know? And so teachers have always had a high spot in our community. Our spiritual leaders have been important, and you know, the church as well has been a rallying point throughout the years for the movement. So I just want to say, support our institutions. You know, it doesn't even have to be a black institution, an institution that's teaching education and the truth. And that's what I think is an important way for, you know, to guide our kids.
I'd love to hear Heather talk about
Yeah,
this.
I'd like to, yeah. I was thinking, you know, as Ann was talking, you know, just the importance of allies, you know, from my perspective, being an ally and making sure that I'm teaching others and dispelling any falsehoods or problems that they, you know, that they may have with the idea, and being vocal about it, you know, being a vocal ally, and especially here in our local community, supporting our local institutions, supporting our local museums, our libraries, our places of learning. I was shopping with my kids yesterday, and my daughter and I were in line at Old Navy, just to share a personal anecdote, and behind us was a woman wearing a Black Lives Matter shirt. And my daughter turned around and looked at her and she said, "That's so cool, I'm so glad you're wearing that shirt." And you know, it just made me, you know, think, you know, like I hope I'm raising my daughter to be an ally then, you know, that she thinks that she wanted to express that to the woman and express her support for the movement. So I think that as an ally and as one that can hopefully influence other allies, I think that that's something that I want to do more of, certainly, and support our local institutions as well as our friends.
Yeah, I just wanted to also reiterate that it's all about education, and I also think that just from what we saw last summer, I think that a lot of our young people do get it, and they do understand, and they are out there. You know, all that unfolded, so many of that was led and inspired and pushed by young people. I mean, they were in the streets. Yes, there was a pandemic, but they still felt like this is important for us to be out here and expressing ourselves. And you know, so many friends of mine talked about their children wanted to be involved and their teenagers, etc. So I do think that many of them do know, and I think a part of our role is also to encourage them to, yes, your voice is important and you should use it. And you should use it when you see things that are not right, or use it to be an ally, or whatever it might be. To start a group. Some of them started certain organizations, and there were all kinds of things that came out of that summer. And so that's something that I am encouraged by, and I just want to continue to encourage. One of the things that I often tell my students is, some of the most significant social movements in our country and in our world were people your age. And when you look at SNCC, and when you look at the Freedom Riders and CORE and so many of those groups, that was predominantly 18, 19, 20-year-olds. And so that's significant. They should never feel like they can't make a difference, because they always have. And our role, again, is to encourage that and to help to educate them. And when they reach out for assistance or to learn more, that's what we're here for. So that's something that I think is important for us to think about.
Let me say that in New Jersey, and I didn't want to get into the partisan politics of it, but I think we have to be aware that there's a push across the country against critical race theory, which is really a straw man that people are putting up so that we don't tell the truth of our history. And it's uncomfortable, it's not pretty, and it really is traumatic. When you look at what happened to Fannie Lou Hamer, the way she was treated, the way she was beaten in jail, that is not a pretty picture, but it's the truth. So the movement to say that you can't teach that history, even the movement to say that you can't even teach that the Ku Klux Klan was an immoral group, that's a political movement. And we have to sign up, and I'm not saying that everybody has to be a Democrat, but we have to align ourselves with the truth. And we have to align ourselves with human values. So when a candidate speaks to our lower instincts and says that we shouldn't teach the history of this country around the issues of race and the issues of oppression, then that candidate shouldn't get our support. And that's going to come up in this election in November, because there are some candidates who are saying that when we speak to the hurt, the documented hurt that has happened to people of color in this country, that's racism. And I hate to say it, we have to reject that. When I say we, I'm talking about the general populace of right-thinking Americans have to reject that. And that's going to happen in New Jersey, because there's only 2 gubernatorial races in the country, excuse me, 2 races, and that's Virginia and New Jersey. We are here in New Jersey. And to the extent that that philosophy takes hold, we have to push back against it. Each one of us in our individual spheres, and I'm not suggesting that you have to go out and be a political activist, but I am saying that when someone offends the truth by saying that we can't teach about racism in our schools, then something is wrong with that. That's a political philosophy, but it's wrong, and it's inaccurate, and it's ahistorical, and it won't help us move forward as a nation and as a people. So that's the real takeaway from today. As we move towards the election, and as people, as we get closer and people start focusing on the election and they start talking about that, we can't put people in positions of elected leadership that say that we can't tell the truth about the racial history in America.
Fannie Lou Hamer was presented with the same challenges that every other person was. But the thing that was different about her was that she reacted to that in a positive way. When Mr. Shabazz was talking about her being beaten, she was beaten terribly. When she was in the jail, the state police officer had another black prisoner beat her And she said he beat her until he was tired, and he could beat her no longer. And the trooper directed another black prisoner to continue the beating. This is beyond immoral. And she was just such, to rise above that and to share her story with everyone and, inspire her neighbors, her people who were like her. These were the people who were not allowed to vote. The poor, uneducated people of Mississippi was all that she was thinking about. But I think when SNCC came to town and when the civil rights organizers came to town, she realized that this was a problem everywhere. She was living an insular life, just getting along, going along like everybody does. And then something happened that triggered her and made her become an icon to everyone,
I think the other thing about Fannie Lou Hamer too that makes her stand out is that she was a female. Somebody had mentioned it before that most of the speakers were male. Unfortunately, the civil rights movement, even African American men suffer from some of the same psychosis that white men suffer from in terms of who should be in leadership and what women should be doing. So even in the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party delegation, she stood out because of her experience. And she spoke the famous line, "I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired." So she galvanized really the whole country, because everyone said, who is this woman speaking with such passion and power and fluency and truth? Because they knew that her story wasn't made up. It wasn't, as they say, fake news. It was something that she actually lived. So that's her significance. And like I said, there are many other Fannie Lou Hamers too, not to detract from that, but people of color knew when Fannie Lou Hamer spoke, they knew Fannie Lou Hamers. They knew of people who went through that same situation. They knew of people in the South who had to come up in the North because white people wanted to kill them. That's true. And people will even hear, if they ask some of their older relatives, they can tell stories of people who came from Mississippi and Georgia and Florida and Louisiana to come up north to hide from people who would lynch them for being advocates and being civil rights. So that's why Fannie Lou Hamer put a face to the distress and the repression and the racism in America. She put a face to it. And she went against the white ideal of beauty. So she looked different and she sounded different from what people wanted to accept, but her story was so compelling. That's why Fannie Lou Hamer was significant and made a difference.
Sorry, just to quickly add to that, just in terms of, this idea of her as a reluctant leader. Initially, she said, I want to register to vote, and then that, the ramifications of that and her losing her job and all of that. But in the beginning, one of the things that we had in the beginning of our celebration of her, our symposium, some of those early panelists were people who actually knew her and people who actually were at the sit-ins with her and traveled with her and all of that. And one woman who was on, I think it might have been our 3rd or 4th annual symposium, she talked about actually saying to Fannie Lou Hamer, who was a little bit insecure about the way she spoke and not being educated and all of that in the beginning. And she said, I was one of those people who told her, use your voice. People want to hear what you have to say. And don't worry so much about how you say it, but that passion and just, the way that she was so convicted in what she was saying, that's what really moved people. And so, she did have some insecurity in the beginning about being out front and being a leader and speaking just the right way. But that individual was telling her, do it and go out there and say what you have to say. You don't have to have a piece of paper in front of you, just say what you feel. And that also is something that we should, again, think about, because oftentimes some of us will talk ourselves out of being involved in things because we think, you know, if you don't look this way, or I don't speak this way, or whatever it might be. And Fannie Lou Hamer did help to kind of dispel that idea, this image of what a leader was supposed to be.
Thank you. We have one question right here, then we go to you, Beth.
Thank you.
Yep.
So your question was a specifically local question when it was framed back when you first asked it.
Mm-hmm.
So I would pose this to Mr. Shabazz. I was here too in the 60s and 70s. I'm a local guy. Born in Atlantic City Hospital, went to Atlantic City High School. 60s and 70s, we were what we had to be to earn. When we left home and went out, whether you lived in Atlantic City or somewhere else, if you worked here, you took on the persona of who you had to be to earn. You had to be one person for the China and Glass Show. You had to be somebody else for the Ice Capades. You had to be somebody else for the summertime. That's who we were. And we did what we had to do to earn, and then we went home and went back to being who we were. There's this assumption that because we're from the Northeast, we have the same kind of contemporary culture and persona and social evolution as has New York or Philadelphia or DC, and in truth, we don't. When we leave what we become to satisfy the visitors and go back home, we go back home to being who we were when we got up that morning. And I think that plagues us. I think that's a blight on us and has been for a very long time. I think we carry a lot of baggage that isn't even ours. But we just haven't known it to be any different because we become this one thing to earn, and then we go home and go back to being who we were to begin with. I think if we set aside, if our first priority when we leave the house, so to speak, and what we instill in our children through the church and through education and through other leadership roles, isn't, if the first emphasis isn't what we have to be to earn or to sustain, and instead is the pursuit of individual dignity, in my experience, irrespective of origin, all people who are first pursuing individual dignity come to the same place, in the same way, with the same needs. If we can get to that, if we can instill that, especially in our young people, you know, I'm 63, you're whatever you are, could be, there's no hope left for us. I say that in humor. If we can get that in our young people, I think they can make, from that moment forward, they make the world a different place for themselves, no matter where they are, who they're with, or what they're doing. If their first concern is their own dignity, the rest isn't really very important, is it? And you say?
Well, you said quite a lot there, bro. But I think, I agree and disagree. I'll tell you why I disagree. I think that those of us who are more mature, we do have a lot left to do. And we have to make up for some of the shortcomings that we have. I think that we have to show in our example leadership to younger people. And I think we have to show in our example that we are willing to cross barriers. We are willing to stand up for whatever the truth is, whether that's uncomfortable or not. In South Africa, they had a reconciliation council. I don't think we have the political stomach for that in America, to be very frank. But I think that we need to, on the individual level and group level, to reach out to people and to show young people the right thing, even if it's uncomfortable. And I'm saying we're coming to some very uncomfortable situations in the next month. I am very concerned, and to speak to what you're saying, I am very concerned that we have a major candidate for governor who's telling people that you don't have to have public policy health edicts, that parents can decide for themselves whether they want their kids vaccinated. I'm very concerned about that from a public health point of view, from a public policy point of view, from a social justice point of view, from a political point of view. So those kind of things that those of us who are mature adults, we have to stand up and show young people that don't be organized around your lowest common denominator. Try to be moved by our human elements and our best of our human nature. And that's not easy, because the easiest thing is to go with the flow and don't do anything, or go with what we think is most popular. but Martin Luther King has a statement and a saying about that, which I'm not going to mess up. But the essence of it is that we have to stand for what's right, whether it's popular or not, whether it's politically acceptable or not. We have to stand for what's right. And I think that is, I agree with you in the stance that in Atlantic City we have a particular history. We have a good part of our social justice history, and we have a not so good part. I think what we have to do is lift up the good part, expand the good part, and reach out to more people. And that's really, we can't get away from it. We're going to have to take a stand on these issues that are before us. And I have some friends, believe it or not, who support some of the things that I diametrically disagree with. But I think that we have to let people know that even though we disagree, we don't have to be disagreeable, and our consensus has to be what's best for the most of our public. I think that's where we're at. I think that's what we have to do in Atlantic City. We have some issues in Atlantic City which are divisive, but I think the consensus has to be what is the best policy for the public, whether it's acceptable or not, whether people like it or not. Let's just say whether people like it or not, whether it makes people comfortable or not. And not that we should make people feel bad, I don't believe in that, but I believe that we have to focus on what's right.
We had a question from Dr. Vaughn.
Oh, yes, thank you, because that was just such a beautiful dialogue right there. And you know, when you have something that's something completely different, you kind of don't want to bring it up, but let me bring it to the panel anyway. Thank you so much. What I wanted to ask the panel about, because you asked about Fannie Lou Hamer. We've talked about her in terms of leadership, but we haven't talked about where she came from. That book, has everybody read the book Cast? Talking about, you know, the different cast that we're in. Right, you know what I'm talking about? When we talk about the oppressive nature in the South, where she came from, and we're comfortable now, we're sitting here in this wonderful mixed audience and having a beautiful conversation, aren't we? But what actually we came from, that's number one. So what did she have to fight? Well, I think she was like child number 8, something like, wasn't she? And she herself had many children. I think she had an abusive husband. Donnie, I need your help on that. Also, you guys, your help on that in telling her story. But I also wanted to ask you guys this. How did her life end? And wasn't she, I want to, you guys, wasn't she buried in an unmarked grave? And did she die? Because we raised money to put a marker on her grave. I want to throw that out. How did she end? Because sometimes you can have a great life, and how did she end?
So from my understanding, and we've had, because of the fact that we've been involved in the symposium for so long,
Yes,
we've had some communication with her family members. And they're actually, as a matter of fact, I think it's her great niece reached out to me recently because they're doing a documentary on her and all of that. So I don't have all of the facts, but I do know that she didn't actually have many children. She was one of many, but she didn't actually have many children because she ended up adopting a couple of daughters, and then they, you know, had families. So one of our, it might have even been at when we named our event room after her, but we had a video from one of those adopted children. So just, you know, kind of to clarify that. But yeah, I mean, the sharecropper life in general is a hard life, and it's a thankless work, and you're doing all of this work oftentimes for pennies because you're always in debt to the landowner, okay? So, you know, she came up in that kind of situation where, you know, oftentimes those folks are not educated, and oftentimes it's a life of struggle.
Right? We come out of that.
Right, exactly. And so that's a part of it. And then for her death, though, I think it was just, you know, a natural illness. I can't remember how old she was.
We raised money for her marker on the grave. Remember that was a campaign?
Right, and for the statue. So one of the things that we in the town in Mississippi is now suddenly escaping me, but there was an entire fundraiser that we did. So she's one of the only women in this country that has a statue of her standing in her hometown, which it'll come to me before we're done. But no, it'll come to me before we're done. But anyway, she has, you know, a full statue of her. Yes, thank you, Ruleville, Mississippi. Yes. And so she's one of the only women in this country that has a statue of her in a garden they've created in her name.
Was that right about the not having money in like what I read about that part of the story?
Yes, as far as the marker, so money was raised for her to have a marker, and for her to have this statue, and that was about, I want to say about 10 years ago, maybe.
Right.
And so it was a national fundraiser. Stockton University donated. Dr. Pat Reed Merritt was a significant part of leading the charge here in our area, and you know, getting people to donate and all of that. And she went down when they finished the statue and named it and all of that. Pat, and there may have been a couple of other folks from Stockton who were able to go and make the trip, in her honor for that statue. So that's just, you know, a few clarifying points. But again, there's a documentary that's coming out. It's being funded partially by PBS, so it should be, you know, nationally seen. And my understanding is that hopefully before the end of this year, that documentary will be coming out. But I have been in touch with some of her relatives.
Sure, question over here.
Yes, I came here today for some powerful knowledge. And I'm so frustrated and hurt to think that when I graduated in the early 70s from high school, this was never, ever, it was secret. And to this day, all these years later, we still aren't teaching this. This is unfathomable to me. Now, what I did learn in my family's structure is compassion. I was not raised in a house to see color. I didn't know what it meant. I remember in the early 60s saying, oh, there's actually a black person on a commercial. And to this day, at 65 years old, you know, a few years older than the gentleman to my right, I remember that. And that was so impactful on me, but we never, ever were shown color in our home. We were shown compassion. And I think we lack so much of that today in this world, this society. All the emphasis are on the wrong things. Things should be taught in school. And it's a disgrace for the young children today who aren't being taught in school nor in their homes. And we bleed the same, we hurt the same, as my husband always says. And this, I wanted to know so much more before my time on earth, because I don't agree with what everybody went through, and I still don't. And I will scream to the high heavens, color is just color. I've been in a position, in a field where I was told, you can't help me because your skin's white. And I said, yes, I can, because skin is skin. And that's it. I love people, I was raised to love people, and I'm blessed that my parents taught me love and compassion, and I never saw color. And if it is in fact politics that's slanting this, that's a bigger crime than being prejudiced. And that's what I have to say.
Are you from locally here,
I'm
like
in
Atlantic?
Absecon.
Absecon?
Yes, I've been
Okay.
there since
Because as you were saying that, I was remembering when I was in high school, of course, we didn't cover any of these subjects. We didn't
Right.
talk about race. And that I hadn't thought about it, but that this event, Freedom Summer, sort of culminated here in Atlantic City, and without notice. Of course, I was young. I was just in maybe junior high or my first year of high school. I was trying to figure that out. But no, there was no discussion about it in any class I ever had. And to think that that it wasn't, I hadn't thought about that fact.
Yes.
You know?
Over and over, and as you were all speaking today.
Now, I know if it had happened when I was in 6th grade, Mr. Manning would have said something about it. But my only black teacher, I think, but.
And you know what, I'll tell you the truth. I'm originally from Massachusetts. My dad retired from the Navy in Philadelphia. We lived in Deptford. The two most impressionable people in my life, and I've looked them up because I'm a sensitive fluff, I've gone online and Googled, the two teachers that meant the most to me, and they were black women. And I still have the recipes from my home ec class. Unfortunately, I found out on Google she passed. She meant the most to me and one other person, and I have never, ever forgotten them because of what they gave to me.
Well, we could all learn from each other.
And let's all hope that we start wising up a little bit. I think it's kind of shame on us that.
Yeah, what are we doing?
What are we doing?
What's going
Why
on
are we
here?
progressing and we took 3 steps forward and 2 steps back?
One of the things that I want to add, you're so right, because I can't tell you how many times I have students say that to me, that, you know, they're upset that they didn't learn. Like, why am I just now hearing about all of these things that you're talking about in intro to Africana Studies?
Also music of
Why?
Black Americans.
Yeah,
Come on,
but
that
all
same
of those
class,
things,
bro.
all of our
Right.
classes,
Right.
typically. The Africana Studies program at Stockton, oftentimes we get students in our class and they are, you know, oftentimes hurt, like you're saying, just like you expressed, by the fact that these things haven't been talked about before. Why didn't we talk about this in high school? Why didn't we talk about this before? And they also often stress the fact that Black History Month is typically the same people over and over again. And there's so many people that they don't hear about. You know, yes, we know about Martin Luther King. Yeah, we know about We Had a Drink. You know, we know that. We know about Rosa Parks. But there's so many other stories that they don't know. And they feel it a disservice, the fact that those kinds of things were hidden from them. So it kind of goes back to what Councilman Chavez was saying, that, you know, the folks who are out here trying to say, oh, you know, we can't teach that and teaching that is racism, that's ridiculous, because what's important is to open young people's eyes. What's important is to be on the right side of history and the right side of truth. You cannot deal with anything if you don't even know about it, right? You cannot do that. And so that's something we have to keep in mind. And just the other thing that I wanted to mention, you know, the whole notion of, while I understand the idea of not seeing color, I think it's important that you do see it. And the reason it's important that you do see it is because you need to understand that history and what has happened to people in this country because of their color. So when you don't see it, then you're able to not see all the dysfunction and all the disparity. So the need to see it is so that you can see and understand that that disparity exists. One of my favorite shows is This Is Us. I absolutely love that show on NBC. And they spoke to that. One of the reasons I love that show is because they speak to that very well. It's you know, a Black man, and he was adopted by a white family. They love him, he loves them. That's unquestionable. But he and his father had a discussion once, and his father said, when I see you, I don't see color, I just see my son. And what his son said in response was, but then that means you don't really see me. Right. Because you don't see the different things I go through. When we go to the store as a family, for example, and people are looking at me a certain kind of way, you don't notice it, you don't see it. And so that can also be troubling. And so that's something that, you know, we want to think about, even though that's coming from a place of compassion and love, to say, well, I don't see people in that way, but you also do have to see it so that you can see the disparity and understand, you know, the racism of the history that some folks are trying to deny and push away. Because if we don't see that, then we'll never ever deal with it. If we keep pushing it away, we'll never deal with it.
That's about to say something.
Good point. And in reflection
What-
of what you said, I respect your words, absolutely. But remember, that thought came to me as a young child. So as I got older, I knew a lot more about life. And now I see it, and that's why I'm here, because I want to understand it.
Good.
But that came as a young girl.
Yeah. That was a good point, got it, excellent.
Thank you.
One of the things I do with my class that I teach at Stockton, students say the same thing that you said, they haven't heard this before and they're disturbed. And one of the books, and I like to recommend this, that people get, it's called 100 Years of Lynching. It's by Ginsberg. And what it is, I think that it lays the psychological pretext for the treatment of African Americans historically. Why is that important? Because this book, 100 Years of Lynching, Ginsburg was a reporter. And what he's done in this book is he has compiled from various newspapers accounts of lynchings right here in America. And I think if you read it, you will be startled by some of the things that happen at lynchings of African Americans. You'll be startled, number one, that many times law enforcement officials were involved in the lynching. You'll be astounded, number two, that many times there were people, family members of the lynchers, children who watched the lynching. You'll be astounded, number three, by many times that body parts of the people who were lynched were sold. You'll be astounded, number four, by the false pretense that they said that black men were trying to rape or go with white women. You'll be astounded, number five, by the fact that this happened all over the South, and it's more than 3,000 people. And this is just the people that we know of. This is just the people that we can trace.
Right.
So we have many problems in America. One of the problems that we can't seem to get over is race. And one of the reasons, and we all know, we're educated on this panel, we know that race is a false concept. We know that race doesn't have any anthropological or biological basis. We all know that at an intellectual level and at an academic level. But in reality, what people go through, what the average African American male citizen happens to have when he deals with law enforcement, we are still dealing with this. We're still dealing with the fact that African Americans, unfortunately, are still not viewed as fully human.
Right.
Not viewed as the same as other people. That's why we keep having these, and I'm putting my city official hat on, we keep having these constant police officers who shoot and kill unarmed black men. We're still having these incidents when people respond to people who have mental health issues, they end up getting killed if they're black, but not if they're white. That gentleman, I use that term loosely, in the South, he went to the church, Mother Emanuel, sat through the prayer meeting, got up and killed 9 people, and they took him to Wendy's. There's a guy in Pennsylvania, killed a state trooper, was on the run for months, and they was looking for him. They took him without incident. And this happens over and over again. And I say that that's one of our dilemmas in America. James Baldwin said it much more eloquently than I can, but we have to deal with that. That is an issue, that is a problem, that is a concern that African Americans to this very day, 2021, August 29th, are not treated the same as other people. And that is a problem, and that's an issue, and we can't skirt that. And we can talk about Fannie Lou Hamer, and we can talk about Summer, but those of us, and I notice it, and I'm gonna stop, I notice that I get treated differently, obviously, because I'm an elected official. People know me in Atlantic City. But if I go outside of Atlantic City, then I'm subject not to have the same kind of deference that I get from police officers. And people say, oh, councilman, because I'm just another African American male. And that's our dilemma that we, all of us in America, have to deal with, and we have to overcome. That we treat people differently, not based on their behavior, not based on their education, not based on anything except their color.
Right.
And we have to get over that. We have to solve that. That is the dilemma. Du Bois said that the problem of the 20th century is the color line. We're still dealing with that.
So much.
21st
Sitting
century.
there on.
We don't want to hold you all. I want to see if there's anybody who wants to share any closing remarks as we close today's event. I know I see some questions out there. I'm sure that we'll be able to still mix and mingle. We have some snacks and some drinks in the background, so you all can have some side conversations. But as for the program, let's see if we have any last closing remarks from our panelists.
I
think Councilman Shabazz just said it.
All right.
I think we should sing "We Shall Overcome," baby.
The problem in the 21st century is
Yes.
the color line.
Yeah, come on, Council.
So perfect. So before we
Darius, can I do my commercial with
you
them?
can.
Please, all of you, you are cordially invited. I'm taking my NAACP hat on. I want to invite all of you, July 14th to the 20th, 2022, the National NAACP Convention. It's going to be right here in Atlantic City. We want you all to come. I've had a meeting with one of my young adult members. Our goal is to have 350 young people to attend the convention. Why do we want to attend the convention? Not because we want to charge them, we're not going to charge them, but we want them to be exposed to people from all over the country. We want them to see national civil rights leaders. We think that, let me say this, and I believe that the board, I know that the executive committee and membership agrees with me. I think it would be a shame on us to have people from around the country come to the NAACP National Convention, thousands of people, it's gonna be thousands of people, and not have our young people involved, not have our young people to see it, not have our young people, black, white, Hispanic, others, to be eminently involved in this convention. It's a once in a lifetime opportunity. That's my commercial, Darius. July 14th to 2022.
Thank you so much.
Can we register online?
Thank you so much again.
All right now, all right.
Thank you so much again to our panelists here. You all gave us some great dialogue, some great points to kind of ponder as we leave here today. I do want to give some acknowledgments to Mr. Ray Tyler and also Mr. Glenn Taylor, who provided the microphones for us today. So thank you all for that. Thank you to the Noise Art Garage and the staff here, Sarah and Sarah. Hey y'all, thank you again for your job here. All of our board of director members who are here from the museum, thank you all for being here and joining us again. And all of you, of course, for spending your time and your energy to come to share. All right? As we close, I do want you all to look on the back of your programs and please scan the QR code. And if you have it in you to donate to the African American Heritage Museum of New Jersey, please do so. If you have a smartphone, an Android, or an iPhone, you can scan that through your camera and it will take you directly to the donation page. All right, we do appreciate any and all that you can provide to us as we try to continue our programming here at the museum. All right, and I think we're going to have Dr. Vaughn close us out. All right, the only way she can.
Because we have to sing "We Shall Overcome," don't we?
Yes, yes.
Here we go. Let's all stand. I know you have to have social distancing. Usually we join hands, but I know you have to have social distancing. Thank you, Donnie. We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe. I do believe. We shall overcome someday. We shall all be free. We shall all be free. We shall all be free. We shall all be free today. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe. Here we come to the end. Watch. We shall